Good morning, First Unitarian Church. I'm Sarah Stewart. I'm the minister here. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person this morning. COVID is preventing me from being there. I am feeling fine. There's no need to worry. I'm very glad that the miracle of modern technology can allow me to be with you on this Martin Luther King Day Sunday to talk about the parable of the talents. The parable of the talents is one of Jesus' most difficult teachings. A cruel and violent master is leaving on a long trip, and he entrusts his money to his servants. The amount of money he gives them is astronomical. The one who receives the most receives 75 years' worth of a day laborer's pay. And these aren't day laborers. The Greek word translates as both servant and slave. Perhaps they made no money at all. And suddenly they're handed a fortune from a man who has beat them over the slightest thing in the past. "Take care of this," he says ominously, and leaves. Two of the servants feel brave enough to take a little risk. Or maybe they've handled matters like this for their master before, or they have some knowledge of the local marketplace. At any rate, they invest the money they were given. One was given 5 talents and turns it into 10. One was given 2 and turns it into 4. But the third servant is terrified. Why has his master given them so much money? He has only received 1 talent. Perhaps he is thinking to himself, why did they get so much more? My master must not trust me very much, and I know how cruel he is. I will make sure that absolutely nothing happens to his money. I will bury it where no thieves will ever find it, and it will be safe upon my master's return. But when his master returns, he is furious that the third servant made him no interest on the talent entrusted to him. He says the sentence that is the heart of the parable. To all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. And the master banishes the servant to the outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oof. As my son said when we were talking about this story at dinner, that's the way the world is. But Jesus isn't talking about the world. Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven. And that is not the way the kingdom of heaven is supposed to be. Throughout this section of the gospel, Jesus is making it clear who will get into the kingdom and who will not, with an emphasis on preparedness, wakefulness, and wisdom. Immediately after this story, Jesus gives the clearest direction yet of what it takes to achieve glory. Those who will win the kingdom of heaven are those who give food to the hungry, give water to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, clothe the naked, take care of the sick, and visit those in prison. Nothing about being a savvy investor. And nothing about having some sympathy for oppressed servants with no power who are just trying to avoid a beating. The parable of the talents is a hard teaching. I have to admit I was not impressed with what my Bible commentary had to say on this passage. In one short paragraph, the commentator writes this parable off as a warning to the early church. In other words, probably not said by Jesus, probably edited in later. Don't worry about how troubling it is. Well, I find this very dissatisfying. It is precisely because we do live in a world where those who have get more, and those who have nothing have even that nothing taken away, that this parable has its power. As religious liberals, when we claim the spirit of Jesus, we are not claiming a spirit that affirms the status quo of injustice and inequality. We are hoping that the kingdom of heaven will be something better than what we already experience, a place where all souls are equal in harmony with the divine. Even if we can't quite get there on earth, the goal we are striving toward is a goal of peace, liberty, and equality for all. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did not say that he saw a pretty okay land where we'll still have many of the problems we have today. He said he saw the promised land, where children played in freedom and equality and people knew poverty no more. That's the kingdom and the commonwealth we are hoping for. This makes a difference even if you don't model your life on Jesus' teachings. We affirm Jesus is one spiritual master among many, but I understand if your response to this particular parable is to say, well, who cares? He probably didn't say that anyway. Yet the story is powerful because it feels so true, because that is too often the way the world works. Do you already have a white-collar job when a pandemic sweeps the world? You can probably keep it and work from home. Do you already have disposable income? You can afford what you need even as prices go up. It's expensive to be poor. As Barbara Ehrenreich puts it, quote, if you can't afford the first month's rent and security deposit you need in order to rent an apartment, you may get stuck in an overpriced residential motel. If you don't have a kitchen or even a refrigerator and a microwave, you will find yourself falling back to convenience store food, which, in addition to its nutritional deficits, is also alarmingly overpriced. If you need a loan, as most poor people eventually do, you will end up paying an interest rate many times higher than what a more affluent borrower would be charged. To be poor, especially with children to support and care for, is a perpetual high-wire act. End quote. From those who have nothing, even the nothing they have will be taken away. That's the world we live in. Yet suppose we don't want to live in that world anymore, or wait for the blessed hereafter to see a change. Suppose there's another meaning we can take from Jesus' parable, a meaning of hope and possibility for humanity. Tomorrow is the day we remember the work and ministry of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was not content to wait for the next world to see justice delivered. Yes, he preached that he had seen the promised land. But Dr. King believed that we could get to that promised land through the kind of organizing, protesting, and political leadership to which he dedicated his life. With the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and other civil rights groups, Dr. King organized the Montgomery bus boycott, the March on Washington, the March for Voting Rights in Selma, Alabama, and the first Poor People's Campaign. He strategized to push President Johnson to sign both the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. He dedicated his life to real, effective organizing, not to dreaming of heaven or accepting that things will never change. He came together with his community and others to shape the change they wished to see in the world. That notion of shaping change is one I came across in the writing of another African American prophet, the late science fiction author Octavia Butler. Butler wrote a pair of novels in the 1990s entitled The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. She imagined a president of the United States who ran on a campaign to make America great again, and who dismantled legal protections for the poor in a bid to prop up America's economy. Her heroine, a black girl forced to leave her home, is visited by convictions of a new way of relating to God. She inspires a movement built around these visions. God is change, Butler writes through her heroine. We do not worship God. We perceive and attend God. We learn from God. With forethought and work, we shape God. In the end, we yield to God, she wrote. God is not a constant, not an immovable force, a limit, or an ordainer. God is the constancy of change, the never-ending unfolding of the universe, and the force which we, through shared action and intent, can shape our world. We can sit back and be buffeted by the winds of change, Butler wrote, or we can work together to shape the change we want to see in the world. It won't be easy. It takes, as she says, forethought, and work. It takes cooperation. But we can make a difference in shaping the world for the better. Here's some change I've seen in Worcester just recently. Right now, we have the most diverse city council and school committee we have ever had as a city. Expectations have been put into place that treatment and discipline of students in Worcester's schools will be equitable across abilities and racial identities. That new diverse school committee and new diverse city council will hire a new superintendent for our schools. The city has agreed not to challenge a lawsuit that will elect future school committee members by district instead of at large, providing for more equitable representation of Worcester's communities. Communities in Worcester organized for years to put the expectations of the superintendent into place and to work to encourage progressive people of color to run and to help them win. Worcester Interfaith, of which First Unitarian Church is a member, the NAACP, and others sued the city to force a change in the school committee elections. Candidacy, elections, lawsuits, contract negotiations. These political realities may not be exciting, but these efforts are the work of shaping change in our communities. Groups who did not always agree worked together to make these changes. They talked to voters, persuaded, raised issues, persevered. These community groups said a status quo that does not serve all people of all races and income levels in Worcester is not acceptable. And they kept working until they created the change they wanted to see. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s had its roots in Depression-era community work, which then found fertile ground in the Black church and made common cause with student organizing groups. It continues in the Poor People's Campaign of today and the movement for Black lives. Shaping change takes time. It involves working together across difference. Change will happen no matter what, but with work and fortitude, we can shape change to promote the well-being of all. Perhaps this is what Jesus meant in his parable. What if we see the sin of the third servant not as timidity, but as refusing to shape change? Jesus may have been telling his disciples, you must take what you have, whatever that is, even if it is not very much, and put it to work to make changes for the better in the world. Otherwise, the world itself will become the outer darkness of weeping and gnashing. The Gospel of Matthew was written a generation after Jesus' death, after the sacred temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed, when it wasn't safe to be a Jew or a follower of Jesus in the Roman Empire. The writer had seen that world of wailing and sorrow. Working together to change it was imperative. So how can we change the parable of the talents to shape the wisdom that emerges from the story? The master gives the 3 servants their talents to tend to and then leaves on his journey. This time, instead of scattering like grain from a sower's pouch, they take a moment and look at each other. Wow, one of them says, this is a lot of money. Yeah, it's going to be dangerous even to carry this outside. And you know he'll beat us if we mess up. What are we going to do? Guys, I'm scared. Listen, we can do this if we work together. The master has had me handle some of his accounts before. I know the wheat and wool traders he works with. They're good families. We can trust them. Let's just keep his businesses going while he's gone. The 2 of you stay here and guard the household. I'll go to the marketplace and make some arrangements. We'll invest all the talents together and face him together when he comes back. No need to go this alone. Really? Oh, that's such a relief. I don't know anything about money. All I can think of is the feel of the punishment when I mess up. Don't worry. We're in this together. In the original parable, some are in and some are out of the kingdom of heaven. If the servants work together, everyone can be in. Together, we have more power and more influence. When we realize we have more to gain by helping and trusting one another than we do by competing against each other, we lift each other up. There's nothing in the story in Matthew that indicates it was a race between the servants to see who could do the best. Who knows? They may even have made more money for their master by working together. Instead of fighting to see who got into the kingdom, they could have set about creating the kingdom here on earth. It's still our earth, and it's still our work to set about bringing heaven to it. We have been given the talents to make this possible. Dr. King said, "Freedom only comes through persistent agitation, through persistently rising up against the system of evil." When we join together to shape change, we help the goodness of God become manifest here and now. I love you all. Amen.